So a big welcome, and it's great to see you, Bonnie, and really kind of just say on behalf of PCPSI, thanks for doing this. So we don't have a live audience, which feels a bit kind of strange, but everybody will get to see this recording. So the context of the recording is that last Saturday we had some kind of technological difficulties, which happen from time to time. So a big apologies for that. But the good news, or if anything bad, there's always good comes. So the good news is that we get to see Bonnie for an hour again. And I was saying to you before we started, Bonnie, that I looked at the webinar and the sound is actually fine, but what you kind of taught, the teaching parts, they really kind of affected me profoundly. And I think you really got to the core of what it means to be human and how to kind of relate as a human to a human. So I just feel it's a great opportunity now again just for us to go over the key points. So what we're going to do is Bonnie, I'm going to hand off to Bonnie now shortly, but Bonnie's going to talk about Bruce Alexander's work, which is so kind of central to addiction. Bonnie's going to talk about inner community, which is your own kind of concept, Bonnie. And I really think, when you think of one of the goals of the 5 webinars is to kind of develop, develop our relationship to complexity. So I think this is really kind of a lovely piece that does that. And then Bonnie's going to talk about shame as a protector. You're going to go into Bruce Ecker's work then, which again is absolutely rich. You're going to talk a little about how we support healing. And then, of course, you're going to talk about, which is kind of, again, absolutely profound to addiction, is that, the difference between seeing our people as having a disease versus seeing our people as being adaptive. So look, we have about an hour, and whenever you're ready, Bonnie, you can start and take it away.
All right. Well, it's good to be here with you, Liam, and with everybody, really. So this has been an area that's been fascinating to me for a long time because of seeing some of the kind of painful ways that we view addiction and how harmful even the way that we see people who are addicted can be. And so a while back, I ran into the work of Bruce Alexander, which is back from the 1980s. And so even then we were hearing faint stirrings of a different way to think about this, but they hadn't really developed into anything. There was some weird things about the fact that he was from Western Canada. And also, I think large systems that see things a certain way, it's hard for them to shift. It's not an easy thing to shift your way of seeing and understanding something when it's going to require an entirely different approach. But I think it's really, whenever we talk about addiction, it's really worthwhile to spend some time really seeing what Bruce Alexander saw and how that changed how he thought about this, and then developed an experiment called Rat Park. So at the time in the late 70s, I guess, Bruce Alexander was working with a group that was looking at what happens when you take rats and put them in a box and give them access to drugs. And so what you see, of course, is that the rat will keep asking for more of morphine or whatever the substance is until it dies. And so the sense then that we draw from looking at that, most people drew, was that these substances are terribly addictive and will eventually kill you if they just have their way with you, and that we can't help it, that it's a bodily kind of response to this. But as Bruce was looking at this, what he saw was maybe the problem isn't the drug nearly as much as it is the environment. Because as a researcher, he saw how completely relational rats were. They wanted to be with each other. They liked to play. We now know that they have an empathic connection to those other rats that they're close to, and all this kind of thing. So he got really curious about what would happen if the context of the experiment changed. So he built Rat Park, which was a big area that had all the things that rats love, places to sleep very comfortably and nestle in, invitation certainly for sexual activity amongst the rats, all kinds of playful things and that sort of thing. And at the entrance to Rat Park, he offered them water from one container, and he offered some kind, I believe it was morphine, but it really an addictive substance from the other on the other side of the entry. And they might sample that, but they always went back to the water. They weren't really very interested at all in what the morphine did to them. So then he upped the ante and he sweetened the water, because rats have a sweet tooth, and I can really empathize with that. And so he sweetened the morphine water, and they still weren't that interested in it. And so he took it a step further and had some rats that were addicted to this substance and put them in there. And the majority of the rats, like the big majority of the rats, went through withdrawals, again, with the support of these other rats who were part of the community, and went back to water because they didn't want the experience of being disconnected from their buddies that was brought on by this other substance. So it's like really remarkable when you think about it, that his ability to see literally outside the box and look at these rats as having social interests, and that it's the breakdown of the social community and connection that drives us toward needing to repeatedly do something to alleviate that pain. And of course, many of the substances that we take in work directly on our neurotransmitters in a way that we get some of the experience of love and care that we need through these, particularly heroin and the opioids give us that kind of experience. So his work wasn't listened to at all, sadly. And so he kind of stepped away from Rat Park, and he began to look at what happened to the native peoples, the First Nations people, when the settlers, or we might more accurately say the invaders, came. And what he found was that before the introduction of alcohol, that as their way of life was being completely disrupted at every level, at the level of land, at the level of family, at the level of ceremony, at this kind of spiritual and communal level, they began to exhibit all the things that happen when we get addicted. There was not much interest in work or in family, and just a kind of degradation of the whole system. And then when alcohol came along, they very happily took that up. Happily is probably the wrong word. They took it up as a way to relieve the pain that they were in because of this loss of their whole way of life. And so then he wrote a book called The Globalization of Addiction, and the subtitle was A Study in the Poverty of the Spirit. So we can hear here so much about how it's the breakdown of our sense of community and of our sense of connection with each other, which is so rampant right now for all kinds of reasons, that then drives us to do some way to adapt to this and to relieve that pain so that we can go on. So in his paper, one of the sentences that actually, Liam, you sent to me in an email and that had really struck me too, is that unlike rats, the cages that make people vulnerable to addiction are often invisible. So shall we pause there for a moment and just kind of reflect together a little bit, Liam, before I begin to talk about how relational science thinks about developmental trauma?
Absolutely, Bonnie. I think for me, one of the things, well, two of the things I thought about was the first was that, you know, we could kind of use Rat Park as a kind of a metaphor for the conditions that we're trying to create, with obviously in the counselling room, but then in community and in life in general. Because I think you said something on Saturday that was, you know, profound for me. You said that we are starving for safe enough connections to really feel held and cared about, that as kind of humans, we have such a tendency to want to fix things. And I think, you know, one of the things I think I was saying to you is that, you know, the feedback that we're getting in relation to, you know, your course for a year is that, you know, people, you know, they're enjoying everything, but they're really kind of enjoying the listening partner, this kind of experience of having another human being kind of be with them in a very kind of deep way, where they feel listened to deeply, they feel witnessed deeply, and they feel held deeply. So, you know, they're my kind of reflections on that, Bonnie. I think it's, you know, his work is lovely, and it might be a kind of bit of a crude metaphor, Rat Park, but I think it's not too kind of far off of what we're trying to create.
Yes. Yeah, I love it. I mean, you see the pictures of Rat Park and you can see why they would be pretty happy there. I mean, absolutely everything, if I were a rat, that I would think was wonderful, and again, subsequently to his work, we do know how social rats are and how much they actually connect to other rats and develop close relationships, that they are not nearly as complex as we are in some ways, but that they are analogous to us in a lot of ways. And so they offer a good guide. And I think last time we also mentioned, and I know Mary sent this out, that also Gabor Mate and Johann Hari in particular have followed along afterwards with the work that Bruce Alexander did, and are doing a lot of wonderful work to help the paradigm shift for how we work with addictions, and recognizing more and more that we all have them. It's not anybody that doesn't have things that are repeated and repeated. And so as we move into this next part and talk about protectors, we begin to get a sense of that, the quality of those things.
Absolutely. I think it's a lovely kind of lead into inner community, because for me, as I kind of said at the start, inner community really kind of highlights and illuminates the complexity that we're talking about.
Yes.
And that sometimes in addiction, if you look at things as a disease, it kind of, simplifies it. But like the inner community really kind of creates a lovely relationship with complexity.
Well, I think so, with complexity, and also with understanding that the addiction is a symptom, that isn't the root. And if we don't work with the root, a particular addiction, we may be able to wrestle it away, but something else will have to come in and step in as a protector, as long as we have a lot of pain that we're carrying. So we can see then, so if we begin to talk a little bit about inner community, which is my particular lens on how we develop internally, how we do that. But it's based on neuroscience. I mean, it's based on what we're learning more and more about how deeply interconnected we are as human beings, and that we have all this rich mirror neuron and this rich relational circuitry that's distributed throughout our body, coming up into the right hemisphere, and that through that, we are internalizing other people and we take them into ourselves. And so I think, Liam, I'm going to go ahead and put up that. This is the one slide I wanted to put up today, because I think we can see it visually. It's a little bit easier. So
Great.
I know last time we even had an interesting time with getting the poster. So I hope this works much better today with that, because I think, again, we can begin to understand that this is how we all develop. And while all of our dyads or our groups inside are as different as a fingerprint, they follow a certain pattern. And so we can begin by talking about nourishing pairs. So we all have had some experiences, not always with family. I mean, a lot of my nourishing experiences actually happened in school, and in some other families where I had some connections, because there wasn't a lot of that available in my particular family. But we've all had some kinds of experiences where we have felt really met and seen and valued. And so on this particular handout, we can see a comforting mother who can come to a child who's distressed, leads to a child who feels comforted and feels valued and feels important. And we could have a father, like my dad was very supportive of me being in school because of his experience of having to leave school early because of the depression. And so he was very supportive of anything that led to me feeling good about being in school and being confident that I had a good brain. So that, for me, that supportive father is there. Well, the lovely thing about the nourishing pairs is that we, as we take them in, they integrate throughout our whole system, and then they kind of go underground. I mean, I might think about how my dad supported me in school for 10 years in any overt way at this time in my life, but the influence of it is still underneath, supporting hope and goodness and really influencing me. Every time I try to learn something new, there's this sense of goodness about it because of my dad. And also because of some teachers that were very supportive, who are kind of form a whole kind of community inside of me that ongoingly supports me. So we all have these people inside, and we can turn to them overtly and think about them, but they're there supporting no matter what. And that gives us the hope and the resilience to go on. But we also have other experiences where there's pain and fear that we can't manage ourselves. And so when that happens, our system gets senses that it's going to be overwhelmed and does what it can to take these, what we could call the not yet resolved pairs, and stores them in the body and in the kind of subcortical region, and then provides some chemical protection actually to keep them from welling up all the time and just kind of drowning us in pain or fear. And so these, though, remain inside of us waiting to be healed, and then they can be integrated throughout our whole system. So on this one, we have, if we look at the right side of this image here, we might have had a father who was at times rageful and the terrified child, and there was nobody to step in and help us. Or we might have had an alcoholic parent and felt terribly anxious about what was going to happen when this parent came home, or just anxious because the parent couldn't attend to us. Or we might have had a passive mother or father and then feel really abandoned by that person, but also have developed then a caretaking child to try to regulate the parent to come to us as much as they could. So all of these then require us to create what I would call protectors that step in between all this pain and fear inside and keep it from welling up into the outside world so that it's always present. So I can just give you, an example from my own life is that one of the ways that I protected myself from the experience of my very critical dad, who was also an incesting father, was through food. And I learned that actually from him because sweets were a big deal in our family. My mother and my grandmother were German bakers, and there was sweets around all the time. And of course, sweets changed our neurochemistry. And so they give us a sense of goodness, even though it might be brief. And so one of my protectors is certainly the hungry one, who's not really hungry so much for food all the time, but hungry for the relief that sweet food could provide. And another protector of mine personally was a reader of books. I would go to my room and get so immersed in books. And so when that was going on, that was where my attention and my energy was. And so I was not then completely swamped by these other experiences inside and could go out and go to school or go out and play with the other kids without just feeling like I was drowning. So it's highly adaptive. These protectors are just this brilliant adaptation that keeps us from being, again, overwhelmed by the pain and fear that we're carrying. And we all have them. So I know last time when we were together, I suggested you get out a piece of paper and you begin to see if you can identify some of the nurturing pairs and be with them, and some of these not yet resolved pairs. And then who are our protectors and how do they help us? So some of our protectors may come because we've internalized the protector of our parent. So the raging father is protecting some hurt part inside of him. And we may also adopt rage as part of our protective arsenal. Or we could, the same thing, if this was a humiliating parent, we may become very judgmental of others, again, because this is the way that this parent protected. Same with alcohol. Part of, we thought so much that alcohol has to do with being like genetically defined, and there may be a vulnerability there, but primarily I believe that when we see a parent using alcohol in order to protect themselves, then that can come to us as also a way to do that as well. And there may also be an epigenetic influence of alcohol coming down through the generations. So a lot of it are variables that can change, and it isn't primarily just a disease that grabs us, but that there's something about this ongoing passing down of a way to protect. So that's pretty important too. Or my caretaking child may come forward and show me how to be a compliant one to keep everybody at bay and keep everybody okay. So there are those things. And then there are protectors that come more out of our temperament. So for me, I'm an introvert. So the reader of books in my room was like so comfortable for me, even though neither of my parents were big readers. But for me, that was my hideout. And I could get so deeply engrossed that somebody could say my name right next to me and I wouldn't even hear them because I was living inside the book at that point. So we have those things that are consonant with who we are as well. But it leads us to begin to really see how adaptive our systems are to the pain inside of us, and then how this leads us to developing these protectors, all of which have a kind of addictive quality to them, because every time the pain and fear starts to come up, this is the thing we must do. It's not like we're at full choice about it. I can't even tell you how many books I read as a child, and as I would finish one, I was almost physically reaching for the next book to know that I had it nearby so that I could go to that place again. And always knew where the sweet foods were, and would sometimes take a package of cookies and hide it under my bed, even if I didn't touch it for a little while, to know it would be available to me. It wasn't something I could not do. It was something I had to do. And I think that's the hallmark of addiction, is feeling like we've got to have it. And I certainly know people, gosh, I don't know, probably hundreds of people at this point who come to therapy. And one of the main things they talk about is that they just compulsively have to give care, which is something you talked about a little bit, Liam, you know, that's compulsive caregiving kind of piece. Because the feeling is that if I can only take care of somebody else's emotions, then I'm not going to have to be with mine. And so I will do that. Only there's no thought about that. It's just what we do. And then we can't stop. We can't stop until the healing happens. So then we're going to talk a little later about how these not yet resolved pairs can heal and then release all of these things so that they're no longer compulsive and addictive adaptations, but really a lot of them simply become strengths at that point. So shall we pause here for a minute?
Absolutely.
So I'll get us back on the screen here and
see each other again, which is great. So you didn't say it this time, but you said it on Saturday, and again, it kind of really was profound for me to hear. And I think it's in relation to what we talked about throughout the course. This kind of in addiction, this hyper focus on symptoms, or you might say this hyper focus on parts and getting rid of parts.
Yeah.
So what you said, I'm just going to read it out because I think it's so kind of profound, really. And you talked about it under the context of inner family, but also under the context of inherent health. So you said our system is always working to provide the best versions of safety and connection available to us, given the neurobiological constraints of our developmental traumas. The pain and fear that we carry inside, coupled with the quality of support we are offered in the outside world right now. And for me, Bonnie, when I hear something like that, I get kind of more and more compassion for my protectors.
Yeah.
Because it feels like that, you know, one of the things our developmental trauma leaves is it's like you've often heard it called an allostatic load, kind of a demand on our system. And then if you take that coupled with that, we mightn't have people in our life, or we mightn't be able to go towards people in our life that can provide the kind of holding and safety that you're kind of promoting. So if you see, you know, for me, if I think of what I'm carrying internally, that kind of burden, and what mightn't be available, should of course I'd need all my protectors. So for me, that's just a beautiful statement.
Yeah. Yes, and the more pain and fear we're carrying, the more protectors we need, and the more strongly we have to employ them, because our protectors are, I mean, I like that word because they really do provide us with the possibility of going on with our lives. I meet with people and I hear their stories, the histories, and it's like, my goodness, how do you walk around in the world carrying so much pain and so much fear? And the answer is always in the protectors that they've developed, you know, whether that is the ability to get away from the pain and fear by being more in the left hemisphere and more, you know, toward goals, and but not with relationships, or all kinds of different ways that we have in our internal brilliance been able to manage these adaptations so that we aren't just constantly having to deal with this pain until someone comes along that can support us. It doesn't always have to be a therapist. I mean, I hope therapists get to do a lot of that work, but also even having family members that can do that, or friends that are able to really hear us, and we begin to then be able to process some of this pain and struggle. And then beautifully, the protectors begin to also show signs of being helpful when they're not being used in an addictive kind of way. So that compliant one, who is always trying to take care of other people, when that's no longer required in order to protect the pain inside, still knows how to do really wonderful caregiving out of the fullness of their being. Absolutely. Or my reader, the one who just wanted to read all the time. I'm a wonderful learner, but I don't have to carry a book around with me everywhere. But it built something inside of me that was also positive. So, and then others that aren't, like that self-harm has an addictive quality to it. Eating disorders definitely have that addictive quality to it, and all of this kind of thing. Those tend to just kind of fade away into the background, but we also know how to do them. And if things got bad enough again, we could bring them in again because our system knows how to do it.
Absolutely. I love that, the way you say it, that our protectors, over time, as they kind of soften, they kind of change into more of a kind of a resource, yes, to us. And if you think about a lot of our protection, there's a kind of a hyper vigilant quality to it.
Oh, and absolutely.
I like to think that kind of changes more into a kind of an intuition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because we're not having to watch what's coming in from outside that might wake up the inner world, and we're not having to watch them. Protectors like face both ways. They're aware of the amount of pain inside and how it's being touched, and aware of what's coming in from the outside that might wake it up. It's tiring work. And I have certainly, over the years, worked with people who I would say 90% of their energy is invested in their protections, because there is so much pain and trauma that's having to be cared for all the time.
Absolutely. I often say to clients that when you have so much protection, it's like before you get out of bed in the morning, 90% of your energy is gone, into protection. So you've only 10% of your energy to live your life. So you can understand how we burn ourselves out, or that we get burnt out.
Yeah, how exhausting it is.
Yeah.
To have to do that day in and day out. And yet we'd be much worse off if we couldn't. If we couldn't do that, we just wouldn't function. We would just be broken down. So there's a great blessing in it, but there's also a cost. There's a cost as well. And when we begin to be more surrounded with people that can really support us, that whole equation begins to change. And so thank heavens. Thank heavens both for the protectors and also for that relationships can provide a way that we don't need to invest quite so much in protection.
Absolutely. Okay, so will we go on and talk a little bit about Bruce Ecker's work?
We can. Let me just, I think you wanted me to talk a little bit about shame as a protector.
Oh yeah, I forgot that one. Yeah.
And the reason for doing this is a couple of things. I would say maybe it's because of the severity of wounding that I've worked with most of my life. I hardly meet anybody, even really in my daily life, that isn't carrying a lot of shame, because in a left-shifted society, one of the things that happens is that there is a constant judgment coming toward us. Am I doing enough of this? Am I doing this right? On and on and on kind of thing. And so we develop this huge kind of well of shame inside. And I've heard people say that severe anxiety and shame are the two most painful emotions. So when we're carrying a lot of shame, then we become hypersensitive to anything that might shame us. So we can view shame, though, as a protector, because if I start to open my mouth to say something snarky, let's say, and shame comes in and says, don't do that, what it's doing is trying to keep me from doing something that's going to get me in trouble in some way, that's going to bring on probably more criticism. So its intention is benign, but the action of it is to continually clamp down on us and make us feel so hurt in our bodies that we kind of curl up and stop relating in a lot of ways. You know, shame moves us toward that dorsal collapse. You can feel it, right? I mean, if I feel really ashamed, my whole body wants to curl up in a ball and I would like to disappear.
Absolutely.
So there was a tremendous amount of shame in my family. So this is something I've thought a lot about. My dad was hugely criticized even for being a boy in a family of 6 girls. He was the youngest, and his life was hell because of the way he was treated as the unwanted, unwelcomed, and tormented boy. So the result of that was that a lot of that same kind of shame was delivered to me and my sister. So if we can see it, though, as a protector, then we can begin to sense how we might deal with it. So one of the things you talked about in the first webinar, Liam, was that if we say, I am ashamed, it's like, I am shameful some way, you know, and we take it on. But then I believe you said it was from NARM, that there is a way to think about that, like, well, now I'm shaming myself, like there's nobody out there doing it, I'm doing it myself. And for some people, this can feel really, really empowering. And if doing that, because of doing that might mean I have some agency to do something about it. However, for some, and this includes me, I think because this was so prominent in our family, it feels shaming to say that I'm shaming myself. It's like, now I'm doing something else wrong. It can have that quality to it. And I'm guessing that the more we've been shamed, the more tender we are around anything that might indicate that we've done something wrong. So it might be possible to approach this sense of shame a little differently if we ask this, like, my sense is, who shamed me and who in my inner world continues to shame me? Like, I can easily see my dad's furrowed brow right now, and I can even feel a little bit of that pulling back when I see that particular face. And then this isn't about blaming the person who did that, but it opens the door to doing this inner community work where we can work with the shamed child. And we can also work with the parent whose shaming was a protection for their shamed child. And we can work with all of them. We can work with the little one in me who feels shame, with my dad, and asking him what's hurting or scaring him, and working with the shamed child inside of him. And then we begin to get this, I love the word you said, this kind of soft, more compassionate way of holding this whole system that has been passing this pain down from generation to generation. So I just wanted to offer that because I remember in the webinar, in the first webinar, there were a couple of comments that it felt scary to say I'm shaming myself or it felt comfortable. And for a lot of people, though, it also felt empowering. So there's more than one way to approach these things. And I think that's the lovely, kind of complexity of our systems, is that different people need different things, even at the same person at different times. So just to offer that as an additional way to approach this.
Yeah, thanks, Bonnie. I think it's such a kind of a excuse me, it's such a fascinating area, and I loved it. I love your take on it as well, and I think there's some value in NARM as well, and for me as well. It's been, I think you said in the first webinar that we can kind of be shame, we can take in the shame. Be shamed by a person, or it can be a kind of an environment, or it can be even a culture. And
oh, absolutely.
And one of the things that I always a part of myself that I kind of struggled with a lot for a good few years was a part of me that would be kind of dishonest. So
I can feel how that's protective.
Yeah. So in different contexts, I would take money and would, in certain jobs, I'd take money and it's kind of still, I don't do that now, because integrity now is a big part of my life, but I can still see at times when in different contexts, if I'm doing account, that part comes in and says, don't give whatever to this, don't give them as much. So and to me, I think it's kind of liberating to say that, to kind of even just acknowledge that I have a part like that. And I think it's been very helpful for your work that we can begin to acknowledge these, I use the word antisocial, now it's probably not a great word, but, parts of, and I often think, and it's ongoing work with this part, but I often think like one of the places that I was born into was an absolute toxic environment.
Yes.
And it was an absolute kind of, it was kind of like toxic shame. There wasn't, it was more, I sometimes inside me can feel the toxicity of that environment.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm always curious, did this part kind of emerge out of that type of environment? So when I talk about shame, that part, I often think of that part of myself, and the interesting thing is that, working with kind of probably hundreds of people now at this stage, that part is quite is quite common.
I was just thinking that I didn't steal money, but I would, like I said, I would take food, and I would take food when I was in college from I was in a dormitory, and I would take other people's food, especially sweet food, and then if I had to, I would lie about it, and then I'd be ashamed, and then the whole cycle would start all over again. So I'm right with you. And to me, the question I always want to ask of that part of me was, sweetie, what were you needing? It wasn't the food you were needing. You needed somebody to know your pain. You needed somebody to be with you. I can feel that yearning, and that the yearning would be so strong, it could be disabling. And so if I ate the sugar, then it would, relieve it. And I didn't always have a way to get it except from the refrigerator in, there. So after a while, I learned to always keep it there. But no matter how much sugar I had, I'd finish it. If I had 6 of whatever, I'd eat all of them, and then it would be gone, and then I'd be in the same place again. So, yeah, it is.
It's a kind of amazing that, in the kind of behavioral expression of these parts, there's always what I might kind of call an alerting function. It's like there's a kind of a look, I'm here, so we don't always see that when we get into that kind of left hemisphere of judging right and wrong, we often miss that kind of alerting function.
Well, right. And to be able, and again, to be tender toward even these parts of ourselves that we don't like very much in some ways, to be tender toward them more and more. It's a long process. I mean, it makes sense to me that we want to push those parts away. That's also a protector. Like, I don't want to know that about myself, so that's another protector. But when we begin to sense that there was a reason for it, we can soften the push away and begin to welcome in the parts that we are sometimes feel kind of horrified or part of us,
Absolutely.
And so we all, and again, the degree, I think you and I both had really, really painful childhoods. And so the number and ferocity of these protectors was warranted by the amount of pain and fear we were carrying, because I know when it would well up, I would break down. I would have breakdowns about every 7 years where I couldn't function for a few weeks or months. And
yeah.
So there was there over time, I've come to realize how important these things that I don't even like very much were to keep me on my feet, to keep me being able to go to school, and to eventually keep me able to be in relationships and to work and things like that. And so I'm grateful for them as well.
Absolutely. I didn't have breakdowns, but what I would do is what the alcohol did for me. It was when I drank alcohol, it was like stepping out of this world into a different world for about 9 days, and I would be gone. Anybody that knew me, family or friends, wouldn't see me, and I'd be like the fugitive. So it was like going into a different world for 9 days, just as an absolute kind of escapism.
Yeah.
And coming back after 9 days, then and starting all over again.
Yes, and then it would build up, and then we begin to feel these things. So again, we turn to them as best we can and say, sweetie, why do you need to be here? What are you protecting? What are you protecting? And thank you for your protection, but I'm ready to look now. I'm ready. I have my support. I'm ready to be with you. Yeah.
Super. So will we go on to Bruce Ecker?
Yes. So the question then becomes of how do we understand these not yet resolved pairs and all of that kind of thing, and what can happen that can heal them at what we call the implicit level, the embodied level. The things that happen to us are always going to have happened to us. There's about explicit memory, we know that this happened or that happened. Well, there's nothing that can change that. But what we can change is our relationship to those parts, and also to the protectors that have resulted from them. So Bruce Ecker is a person who has collected all the research, I think, that there is on how this implicit embodied memory can change, because it's that drives us into the addiction, is the pain and feelings in our body, the kind of terror that we feel in our nervous system, or the way that our belly is just totally crunched up, or I feel like our heart will just break in pieces inside of us, or all these other things. These manifest that way, and that's the implicit memory of the experience. So he has this to say, though, and it's my favorite part of his work, and that is, there is no pathology, but only necessary protections, which he would call symptoms, but that's the same thing. It's a symptom that's the protection that manifests. But he would say there's no pathology, and that's such a huge statement. And often people will go like, well, what are you talking about? There's a whole DSM about this, or, whatever it is. And it's like, well, but really that should be the manual of protections and adaptations. It should not symptoms that need to be somehow grabbed and shifted. So what Bruce Ecker says, our system believes and feels that the harm that is done, if we were to experience the pain and the fear inside, the felt sense of the actual memory would be greater than the harm that's being done by this protector or this symptom. That our system believes that, and it believes that because we've been alone, and it would be too much. There isn't any way. We need the input of another, of their caring and internalizing this care and all into our system. So we can begin then to see how this shifts our way of relating to addictions, our own addictions and other people's addictions, is that if we can come together and begin to hold a space in which healing can happen, that then there will not be the need for the same degree of protection, and these things will really begin to be able to fade into the background. And if we're coming at it with like, thank you, protectors, thank you for being here all this time, now guide me to the places that are hurt inside this person so that I can be with them, and so that healing can be there. I just think that it's so wonderful to begin to drop pathology altogether and come solely to adaptation and gratitude, bit by little teeny step, as we do these kinds of things. So we support healing. Healing feels possible for us when we are with someone who offers a safe enough presence, which means that they come toward us probably with some depth of understanding about these things, but in their way they're with us. It's a non-judgmental presence without an agenda. In other words, their agenda isn't to make me stop eating sugar. It isn't even to make me stop doing other harmful things, but is to recognize that those protectors are the guide to the inner world where the pain is happening. And when the arms, not physical arms necessarily, although that could happen too, but when the energetic arms of a person are around me and holding this safe space, I can become vulnerable enough to drop into this and then receive from them what's called a disconfirming, and I would add also a reparative and restorative kind of experience. So if I'm in pain, Liam, and you come to me and you listen to me deeply, what I begin to do is internalize you right into that implicit memory that I'm sharing with you as I'm feeling it in my body and as your warmth is felt by me. And then in addition to that, let's say shame was part of that memory. If I feel the opposite of shame, which is fully receiving me just as I am without judgment, I begin to also take that experience into that neural net that holds this old pain. And so it begins to be less over time. And this is such a beautiful thing, because if we've had these experiences for a long time, there's going to be a lot of repetition of the healing experience as well. But the important thing is the providing of the disconfirmation, meaning that what I needed at the time but didn't get is now present. So if I was shamed, I needed acceptance. If I was in pain, I needed comfort. this kind of thing. So that comes to me, and that begins to disconfirm my whole system's belief that I'm shameful. It begins to feel like I might not be true, which is really beautiful. It begins to repair the rupture that happened in the trauma. And then it begins to also restore me to inherent health. That's part of my system that's already been there, but been dormant because of all the pain. So we have these experiences over and over and over again. And then as a result of that, we begin to be able to function very differently in the world as the pain is healed and the protectors are less dominant. These adaptations are less dominant, and there's more and more energy in the nurturing pairs, nourishing pairs, of which you and I would become one, and probably already have, because we've been hanging out for close to a year.
Yeah, for sure. I'm conscious as well at the time now, and we'll kind of move around, but just two things I'll say about this, Bonnie. I just want to say it again because I think it's so beautiful. So the central piece in Bruce's work is that our parts feel experience in the felt sense of the memory would be greater than the harm done by the protector.
Yes.
So that's so kind of central.
And if we can just sense that inside ourselves, I will sometimes ask a protective part and say, what would happen if you weren't here? And I can begin to sometimes get that sense of how overwhelmed I would be if this protector didn't step in.
Yeah.
And over time, the protectors that remain are more benign ones than like stealing food and things like that kind of thing. But I can feel and be grateful for, if I just need a break from my inner world, but also all the work I'm doing with other people. And I choose to say, watch a sporting event, which was a great protector because I did that with my dad. And I can sense that part of it is I just enjoy it, but part of it is also it really gives me a break from needing to be with what's going on inside me, which I will return to later. So we can not think that these just need to go away and be gone, but that we can begin to work with them differently.
Absolutely. And I think what you said as well, if you think of what we're doing over these 5 webinars, and for me personally, the biggest disconfirming experience is if we can see people as adaptive rather than having a disease or a disorder. Because I think it was you who said it, Bonnie, like if we see people like that, it makes a huge difference in how they see themselves.
Absolutely.
What
Ian McGill. Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, you're right. You're great. But how they see themselves, what gets kind of energized in them, and how they kind of enter relationship with us then.
That's right. So we begin to sense, and this comes from Ian McGilchrist's work, and he talks about how we can perceive people in a more objectified way through the left hemisphere, which is where we judge them and we want to fix them and all that, or we can be with them from a more right hemisphere, in a more ventral nervous system state, where we're welcoming all that they are in this moment. And then as we do that, it changes how they feel themselves to be inside, and it brings forward the aspects of them that we are noticing. So if I'm noticing your beauty as a human being in the midst of your struggles, you're going to feel that inside. Maybe couldn't put any words to it. Maybe it's all below the level of conscious awareness, but you're going to feel differently than if I'm looking at you through the lens of a judgment about you, like you have a disease, you need to do this. This is the only way out of this kind of thing, is you have to stop drinking entirely right now, or this. That is going to feel so different in my body and in my whole being than if you come in and I'm with you in this kind of warm, open, curious, non-judgmental way, and I'm just with you and supporting you, and to be able to share yourself at the deepest level with me. And when I see you as this brilliantly, eternally adaptive person, that's what happens. I begin to offer to you this vision of yourself, that you've been doing what you've needed to do, and that now we can heal together, and you will not always need to do these things. in this way. You will not need to do that because we can work with the pain. Imagine what that, maybe you can even feel it, that brings up inside of you, instead of I'm looking at you like you have a disease and these are the things you need to do. I mean, it's so completely different. So what McGilchrist says, if I change the way I see you through this lens of welcome, then it not only changes me, but you will feel entirely changed by what I'm offering you in that way, even though nothing objectively has changed. In either case, I could just be sitting there listening to you, but you will feel differently if I'm listening to you through this lens of welcome and confidence in you as this inherently healthy, beautiful person who is carrying such a burden, instead of seeing you as someone with a disorder or a disease. And I think it would be lovely to, with your listening partners, to practice it both ways and really feel how it changes you as the one offering the presence and how it changes you as the one receiving it.
Yeah, for me, it makes kind of such a difference. And I, from doing the air with you, Bonnie, and probably doing other stuff, but I'm kind of so sensitive now if I meet anybody and even if they do little things that I kind of pick up that they're trying to change me or they're trying to make something happen, I get such a kind of a reaction against that now. I don't like that.
Well, and in a left-shifted society, we get so much of it, and so it can feel life-giving just to have somebody meet us where we are with a truly deep inner sense of valuing us as a human being. Absolutely. As we are, and knowing that whatever it is we're doing that we're not very happy about, that there's been an absolute necessity for it, that it's been a valuable adaptation, and that it can change. Both of those things.
Absolutely, and I'm kind of conscious of our time restraints now. So I think we've covered a lot, and I think we've nearly covered everything. Is there anything else you want to say about how we support healing or anything in general to start finishing up, Bonnie?
Well, again, I really hope, I hope those of you that have heard this now may want to go find a listening partner to do the rest of this class with, with Liam, because we've been doing that in the year long, and then we get so much feedback about the value of actually practicing being held in this way and being seen in this way. For both people, both the offering of it as a good practice, but also the receiving of it. And also to spend some time maybe with the handouts and begin to kind of work with who are these nourishing pairs inside you? Excuse me. And where are these not yet resolved pairs? And who are my protectors? And how might I change my relationship with these protectors, some of whom I probably don't like very much, How might I come to understand them a little differently? Because after we've learned something, if we can begin to bring it into our own lives and practice it, it goes so much deeper than if it's just an idea. So mainly for me anyway, practice.
Absolutely. Okay, so Bonnie, thank you. It's been a kind of a nourishing hour, and I've really kind of enjoyed listening again to kind of these. I could listen to them for forever, and I could listen to you forever. It's so kind of rich, and we're back.
Nice, we can hang out together too. I really so appreciate the relationship we've cultivated over this year and some as well. It's very nourishing for me too. And every time I talk about this, there's ways that I, listen inside and think I'm developing and growing, but I will always have a long way to go, that there's always more deepening. There's always more that can be brought forward and held, and that there's real grace and blessing in that.
Absolutely. And it kind of, for me, a humility in that as well.
Boy, isn't that true? I think humility is such a gift. Yeah. That comes over time when we're more and more with ourselves and with others, and it's very relieving too. The left wants us to be perfect, and when we're striving for perfection and all this kind of thing, it's exhausting.
Yeah, it's exhausting. Absolutely.
So to be able to just be our human selves is such a gift.
Yeah, and so hard then as well.
And so hard as well. Absolutely. All of that, both and always.
Okay, buddy. Listen, thank you. And look, I look forward to seeing you soon.
Okay, me too.
And
Bye.
a big thanks for Robert for setting
Oh,
this up,
yes.
and
Yeah,
for
thank
Mary
you.
as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.